So the Tennessee Titans decided to franchise tag Derrick Henry, which I think we all kind of saw coming once they went out and made that deal to make sure that they got a long-term deal with Ryan Tannehill. And, that's why I like the Ryan Tannehill deal. That's why I think it makes sense, because I love the idea of franchise tagging Derrick Henry. Quite frankly, this is why the franchise tag is in place, for a guy who maybe had one breakout season, and you want to see if it was just a fluke, or is this really who Derrick Henry is? He was great last season, but, as I've mentioned probably 1,000 times at this point, he did have that strong stretch late, but didn't exactly have a strong stretch throughout the entire 2019 season, and he has kind of had his okay moments, yes, he was so good at the end of last season, but I just think it makes sense to franchise tag him. He's a running back. You just never know with running backs. Are they going to fall off a cliff? Are they going to turn, the Todd Gurley contract is looking like it's going to be one of the worst in the NFL unless he turns it around. You don't want that to happen to your team, so the franchise tag here, I think, just makes perfect sense for Derrick Henry. We'll start things off with this play, where what's going to happen is that first Tennessee is going to have their center have a one-on-one matchup with the Kansas City player who's currently in the zero technique. What they're also going to do is have their right guard and right tackle double team an interior lineman, but then their guard will move up to block a linebacker right over there. But what I find interesting about this play from Derrick Henry is that it's going to take a little bit for this play to develop, Watch for how right after the ball is snapped, he cuts over sort of towards the left a little bit. That's where he initially wanted to go. But now at this point, there is clearly a gap right over there. But if you look at Henry, he is very far away. So this is the kind of thing where it's like there is now a gap, but the offensive line didn't exactly do an amazing job. They did a solid job, not an amazing one. So now Henry is going to have to move while at a top speed to try to get through that gap, and it's not easy to pull off. However, he is going to be able to shift over, get through that gap, and eventually is able to pick up some more yards. And if he initially ran through the first hole that he was trying to run through, that wouldn't have worked out very well. So clearly the vision right there of knowing what you have to do and being able to pull that kind of thing off, and then also just the athleticism of being able to move, was what allowed him to get through that hole. And that's kind of how Derrick Henry can be so effective. It's not really those big runs. Yes, he has those big runs, but it seems like more often than not, it's just him getting 6-yard gain, 7-yard gain, 4-yard gain, 7-yard gain, and then maybe he'll break off an occasional 40-yard run, and that's how he's able to get those 150-yard games or those 200-yard games. It's one or two big runs and then just a lot of solid runs. There was also this one where what's going to happen is that first things first, you have two Tennessee tight ends on the right side of the screen. They're both going to just run over and they're going to block the Kansas City player right over there. And also what Tennessee is going to do is they're going to have their right guard and right tackle double team an interior lineman, and then the right tackle is going to move up to block a linebacker. So because of all this, then Derrick Henry, he's going to start off as though he's running to the left side of the screen, which will help try to fool some players, get them moving over in that direction. But then he's just going to simply run through that gap. It's not, anything too crazy, but there should be a window where Henry can run through. And now you might be thinking, wait, what about that one Kansas City player who is just barely peeking in the screen right here? What about him? And the answer is going to be, well, Henry's just going to run by him. Watch how he just does fake as though he's going to the left, and then the second he accelerates, gets right by him, gets up into the safeties where he eventually does get brought down. But again, it's a little thing like that allows you to get a double-digit yard run, when in reality it kind of looked like it was the kind of run where it might have only gone for a few yards, Lesser backs don't get that many yards. And I think one of the crazy things about Henry, one of the interesting things about Henry is that despite the fact that he is so big, and he is a monster of a human. I was actually at the Pro Bowl, and he was standing next to offensive linemen, and he was making the offensive linemen look small. He was the same size as them. At least that's just how he looked. Certain guys are just built where they look like they're bigger than their actual weight. He's one of those guys. He's just a monster, and it's not just his size; it's his ability to run. It's his shiftiness that really makes him so good. It just so happens that he also always falls forward and picks up 4 yards. Take a look at this play. What's going to happen is that, again, they have two tight ends on the bottom half of the screen. They're both just going to double team the interior lineman, and then what's going to happen is that Derrick Henry is going to run down to the bottom half of the screen, and if you're looking at that Atlanta player right over there, you might be confused as to who's going to be blocking him, you know? I mean, it seems like he's going to be completely unblocked, and he is. I mean, watch. After the ball is snapped, Henry runs out in that direction. And at this point, I mean, you have a defensive back who is much closer to the sideline than Henry is. Henry is basically right at the middle of the field, whereas the defensive back is at the hash mark. So you would think that there's no way Henry could get around the edge right here, but Henry is just so deceptively quick. I mean, watch how he is going to be able to run around to the point where, listen, is he a big guy? Yeah, but basically the second contact was made, he went down. What was great about that play was the fact that he was able to just outrun a defensive back, and that's what he can do. Again, it's not just his size, it's his speed, absolutely. If you listen to my podcast I just recently made, one thing that you might have heard me say was I talked about how Derrick Henry was so dominant in the second half of the season, but pretty much that's the only time we've seen him have that dominant of a stretch, you know? Throughout most of Mariota's career, Henry did not have that much success, and I do wonder if those things are correlated in any way. And so what I did was I watched a bunch of tape from back then and just looked at the differences. And you can absolutely see some differences. Opposing players were not concerned about the pass whatsoever. They were just focused on stopping Henry. Like, take a look at a play like this, where in the middle of the field, you're going to have your center and left guard double team an interior lineman, and one of them is going to move up to block a linebacker. You also have your right guard with a one-on-one matchup, so nothing too fancy. But what's really interesting here is you're going to see those two Atlanta players just run like that. And the reason why they're going to try to do this is to just clog up both of those gaps right away. Of course, the problem with this is that if this was play action, for example, it'd be taking a linebacker completely out of the way. But watch, because he does this, this now means that the center can't move up to try to block a linebacker out of the way, and now Henry cannot run in that direction, whereas he could have if the linebacker just took an extra second before running in. Henry tries to fight through and see if he can get through the middle, but it's not going to work out. They don't gain much. But that was a play that absolutely could work. It just wasn't able to work because teams were just so ready for a rushing play to happen that teams really were selling out to stop the run. And it worked. I mean, Mariota was not able to take advantage of it the way Tannehill was. Like, look at this play where Tennessee has two tight ends and a wide receiver who are going to run out to block, meaning that they now have 8 guys blocking. But if you look at Atlanta, they actually have 9 defensive players who are right there, right on the line. If Mariota decides he's going to want to throw this ball, he will have one-on-one matchups, and he can pick out which one is his favorite. But again, Atlanta is just so determined to stop the run. And again, keep in mind, this isn't like a 3rd down and 1. This is 1st and 10. So this is just, playbook is totally open here. What the Tennessee Titans are going to do is have their left guard and left tackle both double team that Atlanta player. One of them moves up to block a linebacker. But again, it doesn't really work out too well because there are so many Atlanta players trying to stop the run. And for the Titans, you have so many guys trying to block. Eventually, it's going to be tough, especially with those two interior linemen doing a great job of just two-gapping here, not allowing Henry to be able to cleanly run through either gap. He now can't run through that side because with all of the one-on-one matchups, chances are a defensive lineman is going to win one of them. So unless you can really dominantly win your double team in a certain area, which in this case, they only had one double team because that's all you could afford, well, if you can't really do that too well, or even if you just don't do a great job with finishing off your double team, it pretty much is going to leave Henry with nowhere to go. And as you see, he was not able to gain many yards. So when I look at Henry's sort of poorer weeks and his poorer performances, to me, it's less so about just him not playing well, and it was more so about just the system around him. I do think that his breakout season last year was largely because of Tannehill. I think that had a huge impact. I just do. I mean, it is also worth mentioning that in 2018, he did actually average 4.9 yards per carry, and then last year he averaged 5.1 yards per carry, but he also had nearly 100 more carries in 2019. So to have that high of an average yards per carry with that many more snaps and that many more carries is just a lot more difficult to do, but he absolutely pulled it off. Not to mention, he also had another 200 receiving yards last year. Again, nothing crazy, but 18 total touchdowns, 1,500 yards. His season last year was just insane, and yeah, I mean, he's just a great player, no doubt about it. So that's what I think of Derrick Henry, and that's what I think of the move. I'd like to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.